I remember the moment I stepped into the dim hallway, the air thick with the faint scent of her perfume, something warm, familiar, and impossible to forget. She stood near the doorway, her posture poised, a subtle curve in her stance that made every small movement seem deliberate. "You shouldn't have come here tonight," she said, her voice even, but it carried a tremor I couldn't ignore. I hesitated, just for a second, long enough for the silence to stretch between us, and then I said, "But you wanted me to." The words barely left my mouth before her gaze softened, the cool confidence she usually carried giving way to something almost fragile. I could feel her eyes tracing me, measuring me, and somewhere between that glance and the quiet exhale that followed, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She was beautiful, of course, but not in a way that shouted for attention. It was in the tilt of her head, the way her hands lingered on the edge of a table, the subtle brush of her fingers against mine when I reached for the glass she had just set down. Those touches were fleeting, almost accidental, but my mind lingered on them. The memory of her warmth seared into my skin. "I didn't expect you," she murmured, stepping closer, her perfume brushing against me like a whisper. The space between us was electric, and I could feel her presence before I even saw the small shift in her stance, the quiet pull of her shoulders toward me. Her hand hovered near mine, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I let it rest, almost grazing, as though the tiniest contact could make the world tilt. I wanted to say something clever, something to break the tension, but words faltered. Instead, I let my gaze roam over her, noticing the faint laugh lines that softened her otherwise impeccable expression, the way her eyes caught the dim light in the room, amber flecks glowing like a secret she wasn't ready to share. Every detail seemed magnified, as though the universe had paused just for us, and the only sound was the quiet rhythm of my heartbeat echoing in my chest. She leaned just a fraction closer, enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. Her breath brushed against my ear as she spoke again, quieter this time, almost a confession. I wasn't expecting this. I didn't need her to finish. I understood completely. I could feel her hesitation, the way her hand twitched at her side, the way she measured the distance between us like a question that had no easy answer. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the faint creak of the old wooden floor beneath her weight as she shifted. I felt my own body lean in despite myself, the pull toward her undeniable, magnetic. And then, just as the moment seemed to stretch into something eternal, a sharp noise, a knock at the door, shattered the quiet. Her eyes snapped toward the interruption, a flicker of annoyance, or maybe fear, passing over her features. I followed her gaze, my pulse quickening in tandem with hers, but the room felt impossibly small now, the tension between us raw and unresolved. We stood there, inches apart, and for a brief moment, it was as though the world outside had ceased to exist. And then the knock came again. The knock faded into the background, but the tension didn't. I watched her, the way her fingers flexed around the edge of the doorframe, like she was bracing herself for something I wasn't part of, or maybe something she didn't want me to see. There was a history in her eyes, something careful, measured, like she had been burned before, and now each choice carried weight. I knew enough to sense it. A divorce that left quiet scars, evenings spent in solitude where the apartment grew colder than necessary, conversations that ended before they could start. And yet, in that restraint, there was grace, a rhythm I found intoxicating. I felt drawn not just to her beauty, but to the parts of her she didn't hand out easily, the shadows and hesitations she tried to hide behind a confident smile. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, and even though her voice was teasing, I heard the edge of caution underneath. My gaze faltered, because the truth was inescapable. I was noticing everything. The slight curve of her neck, the way her perfume clung to the air even after she moved, the subtle brush of her hand against mine as she shifted her weight. I wanted to reach for her, to close the invisible distance, but some part of me hesitated, aware of the risks. It wasn't just the age gap that made this complicated. It was everything. The whispers of social expectation, the unspoken question of what this could become, and the knowledge that one misstep could unravel whatever fragile connection was forming. I could see her weighing it too, the way she lingered just a little too close, then stepped back as if testing herself. When she moved to adjust the light, her hand brushed against my shoulder. I tried not to let it linger in memory, but I failed instantly. My skin remembered, the warmth of her fingertips sending an ache I couldn't explain. She glanced at me mid-motion, and our eyes locked for a heartbeat too long. The air between us suddenly charged. I shouldn't, she started, stopping herself. Her words trailed off, but I understood. We were both treading a line we weren't sure we were allowed to cross. I wanted to ask her to step closer, to erase the space that had grown almost unbearable, but I didn't. I just stayed where I was, letting the silence speak for both of us. And then, without a word, she did something small, almost insignificant. Her hand brushed against mine again, this time deliberately, and held for just a fraction longer than necessary. A spark, a silent acknowledgement. Something in the air shifted, and I felt it deep in my chest. Permission, vulnerability, desire all tangled into a single, unspoken promise. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The room felt smaller, warmer, as if the universe had shrunk to fit only us. And in that brief, suspended moment, I realized that whatever caution we carried, whatever rules we were both trying to respect, nothing could stop the pull between us. I was leaning against the kitchen counter, watching her as she moved through the apartment, the light from the table lamp catching the highlights in her hair. Every movement was effortless, but deliberate in a way that made my chest tighten. Her presence was a low hum in the room, drawing me in without a word. Then my phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the fragile rhythm of the night. I glanced at the screen, an unexpected message from a friend asking if I'd be home later. My thumb hovered over the reply, but I couldn't type. Not now. My focus was entirely on her, the subtle swell of her shoulders, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and the faint, inviting warmth that lingered around her. She caught me staring and smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes completely. "You've got that look again," she said, voice low, teasing, but there was caution beneath it. My pulse jumped. Her words carried weight, a mixture of invitation and warning. I opened my mouth to respond, and nothing coherent came out. Instead, I stepped closer, just enough to feel her presence brush against mine, and the air between us thickened. Our hands met, almost by accident, or maybe fate, on the countertop, fingers barely touching. I felt the quick intake of her breath, the pause that followed, the unspoken question hanging in the space between us. My chest thudded, and every rational thought I had about distance, propriety, timing, evaporated. We moved in unison, neither of us fully aware of the direction. The space between our faces shrank, and for a moment, I could see the hesitation in her eyes mirrored in my own. There was desire, yes, but also guilt, layers of it, wrapped in caution and what-ifs. If someone walked in, if the world outside peeked through the window, would it ruin everything? She leaned just slightly forward, enough that I could feel her breath against my cheek, warm and familiar. I wanted to close the gap, to trace her lips with mine, but something stopped me. Respect, fear, maybe the thrill of waiting. She pulled back a fraction, just enough to remind me that we were still teetering on the edge. And then, the tiniest thing, a shift in her stance, the brush of her fingers against mine, pulled us even closer. I felt her warmth press against my arm, and I didn't move away. We were caught in a suspended heartbeat, a silent acknowledgement of the tension neither of us could deny. The room seemed smaller, every shadow and reflection sharpening the moment. My mind raced, spinning through reasons to retreat, to apologize, to protect her, to protect myself. But none of that mattered. Not when our eyes met, lingering, heavy with what we weren't saying. A long pause. A soft, deliberate inhale. We were closer than ever, almost touching, yet restrained by invisible rules we weren't ready to break. And in that moment, the pull between us was undeniable, too strong, too raw, to ignore. I could feel her presence before I saw her, an almost unbearable heat radiating across the small living room. She moved slowly toward me, each step deliberate, her gaze locking onto mine in a way that made my chest tighten. "I can't," she whispered, voice trembling, but the words were swallowed by the silence of the apartment. I reached up, almost without thinking, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. My fingers lingered at her jawline, tracing the curve as if memorizing it. She leaned into the touch, almost imperceptibly, and I felt a shiver run through her body, mirrored in my own. My heart was pounding, a rapid drumbeat that seemed far too loud in the stillness. "I shouldn't want this," she said, her voice low, fragile, carrying a note of warning I wanted to ignore. But I couldn't. I was drawn to her in a way I hadn't thought possible. Every hesitation, every careful restraint, shattered in an instant. Her hand found mine, gripping it. Not fully, not yet, but enough to ignite a current that pulsed straight to my core. I could feel the warmth of her skin through the brief touch, and my own restraint faltered. "I can't stop thinking about you," I murmured, my voice rougher than I intended. Her breath hitched. She looked away for a fraction of a second, then back at me, and the vulnerability in her eyes made my chest ache. This isn't safe," she whispered. But she didn't pull away completely. The nearness of her body pressed against mine, subtle but insistent, and every rational thought I had about consequences, propriety, or the world outside the apartment melted into the heat of the moment. I wanted to tell her everything, every stolen glance, every moment I'd thought of her when I shouldn't, but words seemed too small, too clumsy. Instead, I leaned closer, letting the proximity speak for me. Her scent enveloped me, a mix of warmth and something uniquely hers, and my hands found her shoulders, steadying her, grounding myself at the same time. She shivered, and I could feel it against my chest. "I don't," she began again, stopping herself, eyes darting to mine, a mix of fear and longing that made me ache to close the distance between us. My lips hovered near her ear, my breath brushing against her skin as if to confess silently what I couldn't say aloud. Time seemed to stretch, the apartment shrinking until it was only the two of us. Every heartbeat, every inhale, every subtle movement between us was amplified. And then she leaned in slightly, just enough that the space between us vanished. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, leaning toward her, feeling the magnetic pull that had built over nights, over stolen moments, over silences thick with meaning. And then, a sudden sound from the hallway made her freeze. Her eyes snapped wide, pupils dilated, and the spell broke just enough to leave us teetering on the edge, inches apart, breaths mingling, a kiss almost inevitable but not yet claimed. The apartment was quiet again, the sound of our mingled breaths filling the space where words failed. I thought we had reclaimed a fragile equilibrium, until a voice cut through, sharp and uninvited. "I didn't think you'd see me here," she said, turning toward the hallway, tension coiling in her every movement. Her words weren't directed at me, but I understood immediately. Someone had been listening. My chest tightened. My hands, which had hovered over hers just moments ago, trembled slightly. She stepped back instinctively, pressing a hand to her chest, eyes wide. I wanted to reach for her, to close the gap, but the awareness of exposure made every instinct cautious. Our nearness felt suddenly precarious, electric with both desire and fear. I didn't mean for you to know," she murmured, voice quivering, her gaze flicking to me and then away. There was a confession in the way her shoulders sagged, a vulnerability that made my heart ache. I could see the flicker of shame and relief warping across her features, and it drew me in more fiercely than any words could. I stepped closer despite myself, letting my hand hover near hers. The brush of her fingers against mine was accidental, or maybe deliberate, a silent invitation, but it ignited a current I couldn't resist. Her breath mingled with mine in the small space, warm and intoxicating, and I could feel her pulse quickening against my chest. "This changes everything," she whispered, barely audible. She turned, almost to retreat, but the motion was slow, hesitant, as if she wanted me to follow. My heart raced. Everything I had felt for her, the restraint, the longing, the quiet obsession, was suddenly heightened by the danger, by the knowledge that someone else had glimpsed even a shadow of what we were building. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that no one else's opinion mattered, but words failed. Instead, I let my fingers find the back of her hand, tracing the curve with deliberate slowness. She didn't pull away, though her eyes flickered with a mix of fear and desire. Her body leaned toward mine, then shifted slightly, almost as if testing the boundary. "I can't stop thinking about you," I admitted, voice low, rough with tension. Her lips parted, and for a moment I thought she might answer. But she only swallowed hard, pressing closer, and our bodies brushed in a way that made the air between us feel impossibly small. The revelation had changed everything. What had felt safe moments ago now carried risk. Yet the pull between us, the magnetism, the forbidden thrill, was stronger than ever. Every glance, every accidental touch, every breathless pause made it impossible to step back entirely. I saw her hesitate, fingers brushing against my chest as if to steady herself. And then, with a quiet, almost inaudible exhale, she made a choice. One that pulled us together, closer than ever, teetering on the edge of something inevitable. The tension was unbearable, the risk real, and yet, neither of us moved away. The apartment had shrunk to the space we occupied, the rest of the world falling away. I could feel her warmth radiating against me, a slow, deliberate heat that mirrored every heartbeat in my chest. Her eyes met mine, wide, searching, trembling with the same mixture of fear and desire I felt coursing through me. "I can't," she whispered, voice breaking, yet she didn't move away. Her fingers hovered near mine, quivering as though the slightest contact could decide everything. I reached out, letting my hand brush against hers, careful, deliberate, and she didn't pull away. The air between us was thick, electric. Every pause, every inhale, every tremor of her hand against my chest was a language neither of us needed to speak. I leaned closer, and she mirrored me, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Our faces were inches apart, the warmth of her breath brushing my cheek, the faint scent of her perfume enveloping me. "I don't know if I should," she murmured again, eyes darting to mine, then away, then back. There was a war inside her, a conflict between caution and desire, and I could feel it in every muscle of her body. I understood completely. I felt the same. "I want you," I admitted softly, letting the words hang in the quiet, heavy room. My voice was low, a whisper, but it carried everything I had held back for weeks. Longing, hesitation, admiration, obsession. She flinched at first, then exhaled, a shudder running through her, and I felt it beneath my fingertips as our hands intertwined. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Time contracted into the space between our bodies, the fragile line of restraint fading. She leaned against me slightly, testing the boundary, and I felt the pull of gravity not just in the room, but between us, drawing us closer, tethering us with invisible threads of tension and need. The choice was clear, though neither of us spoke it aloud. Step back and risk losing this, or surrender to the inevitability of what had been building between us. Her lips parted slightly, her gaze fixed on mine, and in that suspended second, I understood every hesitation, every fear, every unspoken confession that had brought us here. I closed the distance, brushing her hair from her face, feeling the warmth of her skin, the rapid pulse of her wrist beneath my hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into me fully, surrendering in the quietest, most human way possible. Our foreheads touched, breaths mingling, and the weight of weeks of tension, longing, and unspoken truths collapsed into this single, messy, perfect moment. "I need you," she whispered, voice trembling but steady in its honesty. "I'm here," I replied, and the clarity of that answer settled everything. There was no question left, no hesitation unaddressed. We understood each other fully now, every fear, every desire, every hidden corner of emotion laid bare between us. We didn't need to speak again. The room, the night, the quiet hum of the city outside, it all became irrelevant. In this space, inches apart, hearts exposed, we had chosen each other. The night had softened into quiet warmth, the tension of earlier hours dissolving into something steady, intimate, and unshakable. We sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders brushing, fingers intertwined in a way that felt both casual and monumental. The air between us no longer hummed with uncertainty, it was simply us. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I felt the rise and fall of her chest as she exhaled, a slow, measured rhythm that made my heart settle for the first time that night. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the faint aroma of tea we hadn't yet finished, and I realized how ordinary, and yet how perfect the moment felt. "I never thought," she murmured, voice soft, almost hesitant, "that it could feel like this." Her eyes remained closed against my shoulder, but the subtle curve of her lips hinted at relief, contentment, and something tender I hadn't dared hope for. You didn't think it could be safe? I asked quietly, brushing a thumb along the back of her hand. She tilted her head, just enough for me to capture the flicker of emotion in her eyes, a mixture of vulnerability and trust. Yes, she admitted, a small laugh escaping her. Safe and real. Her hand squeezed mine, grounding me, reminding me that the distance, the doubts, the hesitation, all of it, had led us here. We didn't need grand declarations or perfectly crafted words. The intimacy of shared silences, the warmth of our bodies pressed together, and the simplicity of just being near each other spoke louder than anything could. I rested my forehead against hers, our breaths mingling, and the world beyond the walls of her apartment faded entirely. "You're really here," she whispered, eyes half-lidded, the weight of her gaze settling over me like a soft blanket. "And I'm staying," I replied. My voice was steady, yet trembling slightly with the same awe I saw mirrored in her expression. We stayed like that for long minutes, simply close, simply together, the kind of closeness that didn't need a label, didn't need permission, didn't need justification. The age gap, the fears, the social expectations, all of it seemed trivial compared to the quiet truth of what we had found in each other. Eventually, she leaned fully against me, resting her head in the crook of my neck. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her closer, feeling the steady warmth of her body against mine. It wasn't a grand finale. It was the first step into something lasting. Messy, human, and utterly ours. The city outside continued its quiet hum, but inside, there was only this. Two people who had found each other, willing to embrace the risk, willing to feel, willing to be fully seen. And in that stillness, I realized something simple, undeniable. This closeness, this trust, this raw honesty was everything. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?